Well, Brother Malcolm once again talking about the roots of a tree. Like how he hate, in his own special way. He had a way with words. And also I'd like to introduce a special guest, a guy who worked with Malcolm X, knew him well. Also is one of the last living witnesses to his assassination. A guy who was very interesting. He has a very unique life journey. I mean, he's a very impressive man on his own merits. He's a lifelong social activist and socialist, like I said, who was one of the last people living to have witnessed the assassination of Malcolm X at the Audubon Ballroom. And also he was a fellow co-worker with Brother Malcolm in the struggle, the human struggle, and the black liberation struggle. I give to you Brother Roland Shepard. Brother Shepard, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I was honored to have you on, sir. Welcome to We All Be Radio.
Okay. Do you have questions?
Yeah, I got a couple questions for you. How did you end up working with Brother Malcolm? How did you get started in working with Brother Malcolm?
At that time, I was in the Socialist Workers' Party, and we saw a lot of things and supported Malcolm even before he split from the nation. He was the first person to organize against the injunctions for demonstrations at Times Square. The Nation of Islam marched out of the subways, marched around Times Square, and went back in the subway before the cops could do anything. And that demonstrated discipline, and he knew what he was doing. And that broke up the injunction against people demonstrating in Times Square. But the thing was, it was his honesty when he spoke. I saw him speak at an organizing meeting for 1199, local 1199 of the hospital workers. Mm-hmm. He gave the best speech at the rally. And the story behind that rally was he met with all the ministers the day before the rally, trying to get them to support the hospital workers, which were mainly black. And he wanted them to come with him to join the rally because Davis, who was the president of the union, had just been jailed. And they were him hauling around all the ministers. And Malcolm got up and said, I don't know what you're going to do, but tomorrow me and my people are going to be in that rally because there's a brother in jail put there by the man, and we're going to stand up for him. And then a bunch of them came down. But he was very powerful. And I was always impressed by his honesty. He was the most honest mass leader I ever saw. He, at times, he could have been mistaken, just, like you have information that isn't true. But when he learned that it wasn't true, he corrected what he had said. He never consciously lied, and that was tremendous. And it was like the meetings in Harlem, it was like he was the conductor and the audience was the symphony. And they worked as one at the meetings. It was a wonder to behold. And something which I always remember, going to those meetings in Harlem and hearing him speak, and the people that he had speaking with him, and hearing him read a message from Che Guevara, and everything else which people didn't know about him. And so he was, I think he was becoming much too powerful for the United States. He had said to me before he died that his ideas are moving faster than his members. And that he has to form an organization very quickly because at the present moment he was more dangerous alive than dead. And if he had if he had the chance to build an organization, then he would be more dangerous dead than alive. And that was just a couple of weeks before he was assassinated. But he was talking about the government killing him, especially after he came back from France and when he came back from Egypt.
Did he have, like, was he known to have a lot of police presence at his rallies or meetings?
Every rally in Harlem, there was tons of police, outside, inside, in the back room, and everything else. You could see them all over the place, except for the day of the assassination.
Wow.
And I organized the defense for him in his meetings outside of Harlem. And we found undercover cops with guns who were given permission to be there by the people who were renting the establishment. So I couldn't kick them out because they were there with the permission of the owner. But I could keep my eyes on them, and I let them know that I was aware they had guns and who they were. And I had people stand around those guys so that we would know if they were going to do any problem.
So Malcolm did not mind having police there, right? He didn't mind police being there at all? At these.
Well, I don't think he made it an issue that they were there. Mm-hmm. I never saw him do that. But they were there. And also, see, the Audubon Ballroom, he didn't own the Audubon Ballroom. He couldn't keep the cops out anyway, just like Palm Gardens and other places, we couldn't keep the cops out. If the people who owned the building opened it up to the cops, you had to do it. Because that's the person you were paying the rent to. But on the day he was assassinated, there was a lot of things that were different. First of all, normally when he would see me outside, he would talk and I would sell him a paper. And he always bought a paper. Mm-hmm. And that day, he came out of a cab by himself. He normally had 7 or 8, 9 people with him. But he came out by himself, and I knew he was perturbed, and he said to me, not today, Roland, I have to get inside. He didn't want to stand outside and talk. So he said, okay, so then I went into the meeting. Now, when I come into the hall, a lot of empty seats. Gene Roberts, who turned out to be an undercover cop and was exposed during the Panther trial 3 years later, came up to me as I said, well, I'll just go to my regular seat. And he tells me, you're not sitting there today, Roland. You're sitting over here. I thought that was kind of weird because, at 30-some-odd meetings, I always sat in the same place. Mm. And that's where the white press sat, which would be kind of a good defense because that was the side of the stage Malcolm spoke. And no white guy's going to get up and shoot Malcolm at a meeting where there's 400 or so black people. You stand out, So it would be a good defensive thing to do. And that's what they did all the time. But somehow, Gene Roberts told me, you have to sit over here today. So I sat stage front just to the right of center or stage left facing out. Malcolm was to my left. I looked over, and I saw several people standing around that I hadn't seen at Malcolm meetings before. Because I went to all the meetings, and I saw everybody coming in, and I saw everybody going out. And so, I can notice the face of one guy who was fairly large, and I noticed his high cheekbones. Well, anyway, after Benjamin X spoke, Malcolm X said, As-salamu alaykum, and the crowd said, Alaykum as-salam. And then, Thayer and another guy were causing a ruckus in the back of the room, halfway back. And then ran down the aisle, shooting in the air. And I saw Thayer go out the exit. And then a lot of shooting started. And when that happens, you instinctively hit the floor because it echoes all over the place. You don't know where the stuff is coming from.
Right.
And I hit the floor, and then I looked up, unobstructed view. I saw Malcolm staring down at the people who were going to assassinate him. And he didn't cower. He didn't run. He didn't do anything. He just looked at him and with such hate and stared down at him like, daring them to shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
And then out of the corner of my left eye, I saw a big blast. And Malcolm got hit, and he fell back about 15 feet to the back of the stage.
Mm.
And, I never forget that moment the rest of my life. When I saw him go down, first of all, looking up at him, I realized how big a man he was and that he was a giant of a man.
Mm-hmm.
It just came into my head automatically. And then when he fell back, I felt so bad. And then I looked around, and all the chairs were down, and people were running out of the room and everything else like that. There was no cops anywhere. There used to be cops at all the exits and everything. And Reuben Francis shot Thayer in the leg. Another person got caught by the crowd and was rescued from the crowd by the cops and taken in a police wagon, but he was never really arrested or charged with the murder, even though the crowd was beating up on the guy, and they saved the guy from getting killed.
Right.
And, the early newspapers said 2 men were caught, but then only one, Thayer, went to trial. And the only reason why he went to trial was that he was shot in the leg,
Oh.
I don't think he would have gone to trial either. So then about 2 weeks later, I got called down to the police station to be interrogated, and I think I was interrogated by the Red Squad, the Bossy group, and I'll get back to them later, were interrogating me, but they were asking me about my political associations, and they wanted me to identify people who were in Malcolm's group or the Nation of Islam, if I knew them and what groups they were in. So I said, I don't want to identify anybody to the cops, So I'm thinking, what am I going to say here? So I said, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom because I wanted to think about what answer I would give the cops. I go to the bathroom, and guess who comes out?
Who?
The man I saw who was where the shotgun was, and later identified by Thayer as the man who was the shotgun person. William Bradley. And recently a picture went up on the Progressive Network of him, of William Bradley, and he's mentioned in a credit on the Spike Lee film. And I realized I could recognize his high cheekbones, and right away I knew it was him. I was in an interrogation room, but he got done going to a bathroom, walked through where the secretaries would be in the daytime, and went lackadaisically into an office, not an interrogating room.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a little nervous because I figure if I identify this guy, I'm not going to get out of Harlem, out of the Harlem police station. So I looked at these white cops. They look like white Irish, you know, the stereotype of Irish cop. And so they asked me if I could identify anybody, and I said to them, I said, you know, to me, all black people look the same. And they nodded their head and let me go.
So you
and I walked out of it. I didn't think I would make it. Yeah, I don't think I would make it to the Harlem IRT station, you know. I'd be some white guy shot looking for dope up in Harlem.
So William Bradley.
William Bradley.
He was a police officer, correct? Was he a police officer?
Or an agent of the police, one or the other.
Okay.
He was in some official capacity in that office.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out later that John O. Lee has been identified as an FBI agent, and that Thayer had met with John O. Lee the day before the assassination. And Thayer's account, John O. Lee was high up in the Nation of Islam.
Okay.
In fact, on the Rathery show on Malcolm X in the 90s, he told that there was a higher up. They knew there was a higher up from the FBI close to Elijah Muhammad, and that the FBI had forged a letter to the Nation of Islam to Elijah Muhammad from Malcolm X in a very threatening and provocative letter, which Malcolm never wrote. So they were trying to stir the flames of discontent. But when I saw that guy there and go to his office, I knew immediately that the cops were involved and that the government was involved in the assassination. And, on the Rather show, Martin Luther King's lawyer said to Rather, knowing what I know about the Martin Luther King assassination, I have no doubt that the government assassinated Martin Luther King.
I want you to hold that thought right there, because I think it's important. We're going to have some people coming in that's going to offer some other perspectives as well, but I think it's very important what you said about the government, implicating the government in the assassination of both Dr. King and Malcolm X, the topic of tonight's show. I want to get some other people in with some conversation. You got Dr. Curtis Martin, are you there?
Curtis Austin. Curtis Austin, I'm here.
Think about football or something, about New York Jets or something. Well, Brother Curtis Austin, have you, Professor of African American Studies, University of Southern Mississippi, very much an expert on the Black Liberation Movement, Black Panther Party, Brother Malcolm X, and all the good stuff. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm blessed and highly favored to have you on. Also, we're going to bring in another brother, another one of the professors of African American Studies, Dr. Attn. Umojo. Are you there?
Hey, brother. How you doing? You good?
Sir. We're great. Georgia State University. Also an expert in Black nationalism, activist, scholar extraordinaire, like your brother, Dr. Curtis Austin. And also, we got somebody from the D.C. area calling. I don't know. I think I know who it is. 202, you are on the air.
No, this is Gregory Reed.
Oh, Brother Gregory Reed, attorney, very much involved in preservation of Black history and culture, and also the guardian of the 3 missing chapters from the Malcolm X autobiography. How you doing tonight, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thank you. I like to have everybody on here. I think it's a very important conversation. I just like to pick off where Brother Roland left off about the government's involvement in the assassination of Malcolm X. I mean, do we have any evidence, any more evidence go on? I know, brothers, he was actually there at the Audubon Ballroom when it went down. He also saw one of the participants in the assassination walk out the Harlem police precinct. And that lets you know that the police department was at least involved. How do you brothers feel about that?
Well, I think even prior to that, you have, Malcolm being poisoned in Cairo, Egypt. And so the question is, and when he's not just poisoned in Cairo, Egypt, but he's a guest of President Nasser. So, he's a guest of a head of a state. And, the Nation of Islam does bear some responsibility, as in, Minister Farrakhan has already acknowledged that to some extent himself, for helping to create the climate. And, of course, we know now that, Hayer was a member of the nation and other members were too. But, the question is were these people also infiltrators? But Malcolm says at that time, I'll come back to that question, that Malcolm says at that time, particularly after his house was bombed, reviewing things that had happened, including him being poisoned in Egypt, that the Nation of Islam, there were some things that they didn't have the capability to do, like poison him when he was a guest of a head of state in another country. They didn't have that capacity at that particular time. So if you consider those things, you look at some of the things he talked about in terms of the 2 people being apprehended that day, being reported in the press, And there's even film footage of police officers saying that they apprehended 2 men. Later on, they claimed they made a mistake and they only had 1. And something's fishy. And when Hare finally comes out years later and says he's willing to identify the other 4 assassins, and there's no move to try to reopen the case. There's no interest by New York officials or federal officials in reopening that case, and you have to, ask some serious questions about why won't they reopen the case. And I think it's accented by the fellow that I'm sure everyone saw the ad or the email that was going around last year showing the fellow who has been living in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey all this time, who was one of the people who was identified by Hare. So all those things should raise some serious suspicion on our part about involvement beyond the Nation of Islam in Malcolm's assassination. Everybody still here?
Yeah, I'm just listening. I'm grateful for jumping in. Anybody can jump in at any time.
Okay, I jump in that. That guy fit the description that Zach Kondo talked about, a member of the Nation of Islam, the North Nation of Islam, being where the shotgun guy was. And he might have been in the Nation of Islam, but he was a cop agent.
Yeah, well, because he had other charges. He hasn't been arrested for.
No, he hasn't been arrested. And if
he has other charges that he has not been arrested. In other words, he's been involved in other felonies, and he hasn't been arrested.
He's under protected custody.
Exactly.
But a good book is The Judas Factor, and it shows that the Bossy coordinated all the spy activities, the FBI, the Army, and the CIA. And not just Egypt, but France refused to take him into France because they didn't want him assassinated in France. And then there's other factors. He was going to speak at the Third World Conference in Bandung 2 weeks after he was killed, after he was assassinated. He was scheduled to speak with Ben Bella and Che Guevara. He was more than likely, I know from personal experience, going to be one of the primary speakers at the first march against the war in Vietnam in 1965, which sort of changed the whole character of that movement. And, he was thinking of running for mayor and also doing a campus tour. And so all those things add up, and they saw him as being a danger. And the only thing about the Nation of Islam, they made the Nation of Islam was a good scapegoat for the FBI. And it was he knew about that house that Malcolm that they firebombed.
And I would add to that the scholars have pointed out, and I happen to know from having seen some of the documents myself, CIA and FBI documents, that he had and copies of his calendar, that he had intentions to meet with the southern wing of the movement the following Sunday down in Selma. And he also had made a promise to the SNCC students that he spoke to that he would come and help them organize there in southwest Mississippi in Pike and Amite County. So there was a lot to be threatened by if you are in charge of maintaining the status quo.
Yeah. And COINTELPRO was going on, and J. Edgar Hoover targeted both King and Malcolm X and Elijah.
Absolutely.
Brother Roland, you also, I know Dr. Manning Marable, who's an expert on Malcolm X, doing a lot of extensive research. He stated that the head of the New Jersey Black Muslim Mosque was there in attendance on the February 21st. Can you confirm that at all?
I couldn't confirm that. And, what Marable says in the last 10 years contradicts a whole bunch of stuff that he said when he was young. Yeah.
That's interesting.
His book, Living Black History, is not a living black history. It's a distorted history, but that's what professors at Columbia do. You know, he fought for the Malcolm X Audubon Ballroom Memorial, but he didn't fight against the gentrification of Harlem and the extension of Columbia as one of the largest landlords in Manhattan. You know, it's always the silence of the lambs, or as Martin Luther King said, you remember not the words of your enemies, but the silence of your friends. Now, the stuff that Maribel wrote, even up to 1990, is pretty good stuff. I would recommend reading it, but the rest of this stuff, I would just read it to see where he's at, but, don't expect any truth to be found.
Let me ask you this. I know Malcolm, he trained in security, right? He trained in security detail, correct? He trained,
and James Shabazz trained the NOI when he was in the Nation of Islam.
Let me ask you, you think it was strange that nobody ran to protect the principal? I mean, which is Malcolm. Malcolm was the principal. When there was a disturbance, nobody actually came to cover him.
That was very strange because in January, when Malcolm spoke Prospects for Freedom talk, I had all white people up on the stage, and I had said to James Shabazz and his security guys that we're going to, any sign of a disturbance, we're going to go stand in front of Malcolm. And that way, they won't shoot somebody that's white because it would contradict the newspapers and their image of Malcolm X. We had black people in the audience in defense, but actually on the stage, I thought that would be most effective. And I first got suspicious of Gene Roberts because Malcolm was backstage and he didn't know me. And I walked straight up to Malcolm and he didn't even impede me. And I told James Shabazz that guy's not worth a shit. And the pictures of him giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to Malcolm X, no, that wasn't him. The person that went on the stage was Yuri Kochiyama. She was a nurse. And she gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to Malcolm. My impression is that Gene Roberts ran up there later to see if Malcolm was dead. And at the beginning of the meeting, he was up front right by the shotgun. Then somehow, when all the ruckus went on, he wound up in the back of the room. I remember seeing him back there because I didn't like the guy anyway. I thought he was useless as a bodyguard.
But he was over security, right? He was chief security, or was he in charge of security?
No, he wasn't chief security. I think Reuben Francis was. One time I saw people who were dressed like NOI men, and they came up at the Malcolm. The meeting had just ended, but I had gone outside because I smoked at the time, and they called me over to buy a paper, and they asked me, when's the meeting going to get over? And I sort of saw either a gun or a shotgun slide out of sight in the back seat. So I told them about another half hour. Then I told Reuben Francis the license of the car, and it had a New Haven plates. And Reuben Francis and about 8 guys came running out to hunt for those guys, but they were long gone. I don't know what happened that day.
Another thing you have to consider, though, is this is a new organization, even though it might have had some people who had come over from the Nation of Islam. And I think that there were some things that weren't solidified, and as well as being infiltrated. So you have all those things going on at one time.
You can have agents very easily misdirect people.
Yes, most definitely.
You can most definitely, and that was an occurrence. I mean, just a side note, Malcolm was, pretty fearless. One time there was a meeting down in the village. Malcolm spoke out, and he got into his car with James Shabazz, and we were in charge of responsible until he leaves, in the car. And the garbage man sees Malcolm X, and he tells the other garbage man, I'm going to talk to the general. So there we are, about 12:30, 12:45 in the morning. Malcolm's talking to the garbage man, and we're hanging around just to be there for our job to guard his life until he drives away. But he talked for about 15 minutes to this rank and file person. He wasn't an elitist. He talked to everybody. You know, he just was a genuine person.
And in some senses, in terms of politically organizing, that's a good thing. But in terms of him being a VIP, if you will, security target, we know whose life is in danger, is a bad thing. And, you know, one of the things that did occur was Malcolm said that there would be no more searches. You know, like we're used to, you know, people in the black community go to Nation of Islam events. No, there's generally a search. But generally, the principle, the target isn't the person who makes a decision about what security should be, particularly when it's a life-threatening situation. And that, you know, as it was in that case. So that was something that, you know, I always wondered who encouraged Malcolm to lift it. Was he encouraged to lift
also,
that person at the time?
It was like everything was set up before Malcolm got there, and Malcolm got there late. Because the regular crew didn't meet him to pick him up.
I would like to say, we were talking about Gene Roberts, the guy who was the undercover agent for Bossy, in that picture of him, quote-unquote, resuscitating Malcolm. But there's another image that kind of correlates with that, with Dr. King, when he got shot in the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, and the young man that stands or is kind of hovering over his body, he's a CIA officer, intelligence officer named Morrell McCullough. And he was like a double guy. So the government always have people on the scene within the circle to make sure that the mission went through, to check out.
Right.
So even with Tupac assassination, and that's another story. But all this stuff, I think in a lot of ways we got to stop treating these things like separate incidents, because there's normally the same players involved in all these conspiracies, or it might not be the same players, but it's the same game that's being run. It's all connected some type of way, because even with Jonestown, you can connect it to Dr. King's assassination, to Malcolm's, to JFK assassination, if you do the research and behind-the-scenes stuff, because so many of the same folks are pulling the strings. Go ahead.
As Evans points out, that 3 of the guys that were involved in the FBI surveillance and everything else, or the whole spy agency surveillance of Malcolm X, turned up later as part of the Watergate plumbers.
You see, there you go.
Well, I mean, one thing that's very clear is that Roberts was involved in the case of the New York 21. So you have in that case you have Roberts, who had infiltrated Malcolm X's organization, end up in testifying. What would it be, Curtis? 1965. Would it be what? 6 years later, we testified against the 21.
The Panther trial.
Right. So only 3 years later, testifying in that trial against the New York Panthers. I think it's a little bit later. It got to be.
Well, maybe it first started.
Yeah, you're right. I start with that, right?
7 years later, yeah.
Right. It's in 1971.
Yeah.
I was going to
Pardon?
Go ahead. Y'all go ahead and finish. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, so I mean that's clear in that case that you definitely have that in the case of Roberts. But there are several when you talk about COINTELPRO, people who are FBI agents who are over one operation, might be with the Black Panther Party, might be an operation versus the American Indian movement. Right. Young hordes, so because you're talking about people who develop skills in counterinsurgency, and then they're used in other operations and guiding other operations.
I guess we're talking about so many things. We get into the assassination, about the death of Malcolm. I want to talk about his life as well as his legacy, his living legacy.
I know so much. It's a real important. The real important point is that he came out against the war in Vietnam. He was the first mass leader of any organization to come out against the war.
That's true. What about the 64?
64 he did.
But way before Dr. King.
Martin Luther King didn't come out against the war until 68. And then he got killed a little bit. I mean, 67, but he came out a little. He got killed a little later. Yeah. You know, he didn't live much longer either. He only lived a year longer after, you know, that's what Malcolm did. He lived a year longer when he came out against the war.
Yeah, King, it was 1 year to the date he made his statement in opposition to the Vietnam War that he was assassinated the following year. April 4th, he makes 67. He makes his statement against the war. It's on April 4th, 1968, that he's assassinated.
You know, like with King too, they don't publicize his speech that he gave to Stanford just before the April anti-war demonstration in '67. The Other America, where he talked about a work-starved men standing in an island of despair. And it's surrounded by they're on an island of despair surrounded by an ocean of wealth. And that speech would be just as good today. All you got to do is substitute Iraq or Afghanistan for that speech. That was a tremendous speech. That was the speech he said it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man to pick himself up by his own bootstraps. It's a very moving speech, and it's online. If you have problems, the BOB has my website, and I have it in my article on the assassinations of King and Malcolm X.
But if you talk about Malcolm's legacy, and you know, I think Mr. Shepard has pointed out some very important points. But I think you also have to look at this whole question of us having, and when I say us, I'm talking about people of African descent in this country, having an identity. You know, the civil rights movement really didn't emphasize that. You know, it was seeking inclusion into the general American society. And, you know, folk during that time were not trying to distance themselves from what the common white American viewed as normal, if you will. And so, but Malcolm, particularly in the last 11 months of his life, of course, he always, in the Nation of Islam, spoke to us having an identity and us having a sense of self and knowing our history and all those things. And it was really emphasized after he leaves the nation when he makes the trips to Africa. So when you see a movement come after him, talking about Black is beautiful, part of that's Malcolm's legacy. When you see what would spring forth a year after the assassination, a Black Power movement.
The Black Power movement and Stokely Carmichael taking over.
Exactly. All of that kind of springs is inspired from Malcolm's emphasis on identity, his emphasis on self-determination, his emphasis on self-respect. As well as Malcolm and, you know, Robert Williams before him and others and groups like the Deacons for Defense represented that, you know, talked about the necessity of Black people being able to protect themselves by any means necessary. And so Curtis's work, like on the Black Panther Party and other organizations who implemented that type of ideology that asserted our rights during that time is definitely a part of Malcolm's legacy. And finally, I would say that, you know, when I think, and I think Shepard spoke about this earlier, when you think about Malcolm, Malcolm talked about internationalizing the situation of African people inside the United States. And I think that kind of took place on two different realms. One is he took our struggle to other places. He took the struggle that was going on in Mississippi to the OAU, and he talked to world leaders about what was going on about our situation. And on the other hand, I think Malcolm was, and you know, like people like Robert Williams, were important in having us seeing there's a world out there, and there are allies out there. There are allies in Africa, because of course Malcolm was a Pan-Africanist, but he also talked about, you know, the struggle going on in Cuba, struggle going on in China, even prior to leaving the Nation of Islam, Malcolm's relationship with Fidel, when the Cuban delegation comes to Harlem in 1960, and Malcolm, helping providing them lodging and meeting with the Cubans during that particular time, I think is significant. And, of course, the overwhelming response to the people of Harlem gave to Fidel when he resided at the Hotel Teresa in 1960. So I think Malcolm is a person that has, black folk in the United States begin to look at the world and look at the world differently, and then decide, giving us two choices of who are friends and who are enemies. And, that's another, the element of self-determination that he represents for our people, and us making decisions for ourselves in terms of who we're going to relate to, and not letting, Kennedy or Nixon, Johnson make those decisions for us.
Yes. Now,
I want to segue right quick because he talked about his legacy and what he did. And also, one very important part of Malcolm's legacy is his autobiography, his written works and whatnot. And we got on the phone, got Attorney Gregory Reed, who actually has the 3 chapters that were not included for whatever reason in the autobiography of Malcolm X. And he's the gatekeeper for that, the guardian of that. I'd just like to talk to him for a moment about how he was able to get a hold of these 3 chapters, and what is the plan, and what has he learned from it. And hopefully, what can we all learn from them? Attorney Reed?
Yes, sir.
How did you get the 3 chapters?
Well, they're really not 3 chapters. There's really 4 chapters.
Okay.
Yeah, there are 4 chapters. There's the 3 chapters which I had and which I did not recognize. There was a 4th chapter. If you notice, if you read the autobiography, there's no introduction by Malcolm X. The introduction was written by M.S. Handler, and that was approved by Malcolm X. He was a New York journalist. The other person that was considered to be a candidate for it was Dr. C.R. Lincoln, who wrote the book of The Black Muslim. And whatever reason that he was not selected at the time, and I cannot speak to that, but I knew Dr. C.R. Lincoln personally because he did the introduction to my book, Economic Empowerment Through the Church, that got me the American Book Award, and a lot of those concepts came from the missing chapters that I used in that book. But the 3 chapters, how did I get them, and the introduction, they were unpublished writings. And then I have the manuscript, which is the complete manuscript with handwritten notation. They were auctioned off at the Alex Haley estate in 1992, and I was one of 8 African Americans to attend that auction when our people, when others knew of that, did not actually attend to preserve the heirlooms of Malcolm X or Alex Haley. And that's something that we need to take note of. But I didn't go there at the time to actually acquire it because I didn't think I was in that league or to have the money or the resources, because they said that it would have been so priceless in terms of about $3 million that they would want for it, which European manuscripts have gone for that. So I went there really to preserve whatever I could to do, and then I got caught up in it. And then I'm up there thinking about would I let that get by, and so I just stood firm, and then I just got caught up in it, and then I made sure that I was in a bidding for it with Playboy Foundation, the University of Tennessee, people like that was trying to acquire the papers at the time.
Well, I'm glad you got it, brother. I appreciate that diligence. I'm glad you stuck with it.
Yeah, I appreciate you, the acknowledgement. So during that time, it took me, and now I'm in the middle of that with releasing those chapters now at 18 years. See, I was involved with Rosa Parks. I was her attorney for 15 years. And that took me on a course of elevating her legacy at the time. And then I had done 2 books with her, and what I wanted to do when I was representing her, I got her the Presidential Medal. I was the catalyst behind that, and the Congressional Medal. I had engineered that for her, and so that is one of the missions that I'm up here seeing to do for our brother Malcolm X, because a person who has fought for freedom that much, he should have that type of honor and recognition, and so that's part of this mission of releasing his chapters. And as a result of that, if you go to www.365-50.com, you will see a website dealing with the missing chapters, and we're celebrating his legacy for 365 days up to the 50th year anniversary. So there's events going around throughout the United States that I have helped put together in order to institutionalize him on a higher level in terms of his work and his contribution to mankind as well. So that is a part of releasing these chapters and this material. And so I started off doing that this year. I did the reading of it at the Audubon Ballroom on his 85th birthday celebration.
Can you give that website again?
365-50.com. The 365 stands for 365-day celebration. And then they give you a list of activities in terms of that have been staged and honored for him and by other people joining up with this website. And that's 365-50.com. And one thing that we all have to recognize, is that what do we learn from this great individual in terms of it? See, we have to be about preserving our culture and being the gatekeepers of these things, and that is the reason why the behavior among our people is so malaligned. Because when people misappropriate your culture, they program you when you don't even know you're being programmed. And that goes on daily, because we don't even control the words as well as the media and what is the message that is going out there. And so then it's a slow process, and it goes on. And so that's why you have a lot of our young people so misaligned, because the adults are misaligned, and we don't know that we've been programmed. And that was Malcolm's message about how much we've been brainwashed as well. So his message, he's the first gatekeeper to speak up on the human rights level. On the human rights, see, none of the people came out of the civil rights movement. We were still struggling. See, his vision was so far ahead. He was speaking, that's what you all were talking about, on the world leader, while he was connecting all these other dots. And that became a threat to the system because he had the power to unite. See, as long as you deal with things on a civil rights basis, the courts regulate us. The courts. See, we have our voting rights. That's through legislation. They could change that. Anytime that you could deal with things from a legislation or a court basis, they regulate you. When you're on a human rights basis, in which all the majority of whites are on, then therefore they get their rights by natural birth. We get ours by legislation, or courts regulate us.
Yeah, and also the media.
So then we are being controlled. So then therefore, if you go to his message, then therefore it becomes like the health bill. That was the first bill that's really a human rights bill, because that means everybody should have health care. See, that's Malcolm's message. And so a lot of people are starting to recognize him today and to identify with him even more with the high unemployment, the job situation, the health care, all these things that he was speaking right on a human rights basis in terms of people.
And the media makes Malcolm seem harmless and irrelevant. They don't explain what King stood for at the end of his death. They said,
yes.
They say I have a dream. They act like Montgomery bus boycott wasn't for self-defense when it was.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't make a big thing about Rosa Parks going to Robert Wayne's funeral.
There you go.
She believed in righteous self-defense. You think that she was a pacifist, for Christ's sakes.
Well, she was more... That's true. She was more favored, to be honest with you, and straight to be blunt, she was more favored with Malcolm than King. And I know that by representing her, she said, I wasn't about somebody hitting on me.
She was for righteous self-defense, is her words.
No.
Well, actually, that's one of the great myths of our history. That's one of the great myths of our history is that civil rights movement was a nonviolent movement. There were folk in it, of course, who used that strategy and tactic. But you had if you talk about a movement that occurred in the South, most black Southerners were not nonviolent. And there's so many examples. But that's a topic we could talk about another day because that's one I'm writing about.
Thank you. But, so the three missing chapters deals with it's called, they're not chapters per se. They are essays that deals with his outlook on life. He signed agreement in March 21, 1964. This is after he had left the Nation of Islam, that he wanted those three chapters to be in the autobiography, and they were called the Negro. In terms of how we don't understand who we are, and therefore if we don't understand who we are, then we don't know where we are going. In order to understand, we have to understand who we are. We have to understand 4 W's of life, who we are, what we are, where we've been, that means spiritually, and where we are lined up to know where we're going, what's your purpose in life. So he practiced 4 W's. Then he had, the other chapter was called the 20 million Muslims. And so he had even prophesied the Million Man March before it had even happened. And that was the 20 million. The 20 million Muslims based upon that all the black people in this country have been disenfranchised. And so then all of them have a common interest in order to have self-freedom and self-determination. And so his mission was trying to line up philosophically of 20 million Muslims. And then he had the end of Christianity. Those were 3 essays that were omitted. The end of Christianity deals with, in terms of his philosophy, was looking at it that way, that it was a religion that has not been practiced the way it has been written. And just like when he said in his speeches, he said when the white man would put a rope around your neck, you praying for one God and they praying for one, and then you say, but your God won't come because, see, we always dealing with from a different point of view, like we'll get our relief in the afterlife while they were getting their benefits in the present life. And and so there was just 2 practices, and so he was saying it should come as the more you recognize that the religion has not been taught in the way that it should be. So those are the 3 chapters. In his introduction of his own life, he used numerologies of 7. When you started to look at that, he said, when I was 7, I was born from a family of 7 children. And so he goes in numerologies, and you start looking at this. Watch this, the 7. You're going to start seeing the 7. He was even come from a family of 7 children. He was even the class president in the 7th grade. He spent 7 years in prison. He came out, technically, he spent 77 months in prison. He came out on August the 27th, 1952. He was taught by Elijah Muhammad, who was the 7th child out of 12. He was appointed to temple number 7. Now you start catching it. Watch this. He had forecast. 7 is a number of completion of the phenomenon of the attributes of even God, even in Scripture. Now he was even married to Betty Shabazz 7 years. He was married at 32, and he got assassinated when he was 39. He started looking at all these things. Then he was mentored even by Elijah Muhammad when Elijah Muhammad assigned his 7th child, Wallace Dean, as being the person, and he wouldn't have brought him the message of the transgression against his own father, the 7th child. you start looking at the 7. See, now they're showing you there's something else going on in a higher power beyond us. Now watch these other 7s that come into place. Elijah Muhammad tells him not to go to the fight of Muhammad Ali, who was Cassius Clay at the time. He buys ticket number 7, and you can look it on the video. He said, "What's your number?" He said, "I bought a ticket for ticket number 7. Then Liston falls, didn't answer the bell, lost in the 7th round. Alex Haley dies when he was 70. So he was into numerology. So this is all in the missing chapters as well.
There's a whole lot of 7s, but I think what's important for us is to demand the FBI, according to the Dan Rather show, has 50,000 files that they never got to see.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, nobody has taken up where Malcolm and Martin Luther King has left off.
Yes, true.
So assassinations have been effective. And the last thing I wanted to say was Julia Hare talked about integration being the illusion of inclusion.
Yes, that's
and in reality today, blacks are in worse shape than they were at the time of King and Malcolm X's assassination. The majority of blacks, talented 10 did all right, but the rest, the field they rose, so to speak, are in worse shape.
Well, you're right 100%, and not to talk over you respectfully. Well, the reason why Malcolm said there could not be true integration until you have economic independency, and that's where his message was. And part of that was there's a 14 economic plan that was a part of the missing chapters to show you how to achieve that. That was left out of the book.
And he said this system doesn't have the capacity to produce freedom.
You know, another thing is I don't think the objective should be to have another Malcolm X or King. I think we need hundreds, thousands of Malcolms and Kings. I think we need to, because, you know, we have that paradigm of leadership of a Messiah, then somebody can easily be taken out again. But what we need to do is develop the type of collective development in our communities where we're developing and the type of organization that's necessary. You know, I went to the Basque country some years ago, and, you know, there have been times that in that movement to get their independence from Spain, that their entire leadership has been captured, but they keep on fighting because it's been ingrained from one generation to the next. And so I think we need to change our paradigm and kind of look at it from that point of view and kind of build it from the bottom up, too. It's important to have charismatic leaders. I'm not saying that. But, you know, that shouldn't be the basis of our struggle.
Yeah.
I agree.
Right, and I think another thing.
I want to thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on the show.
It's an honor to have you on, Brother Roland.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
I was actually going to address one of the comments, one of the points he made in his last comment, and that was nobody has really stepped forward. I would take issue with that only because there are a number of people, not just in the Black Panther Party, but people who came out of SNCC and CORE and other organizations that picked up the mantle. Perhaps they didn't get the kind of media coverage that Malcolm received. But they were talking about and, in fact, implementing many of his policies. Now, of course, what I know most about are the programs and platforms of the Black Panther Party. And there are any number indications that this is what they thought they were doing. They even went so far as to call themselves either the sons of Malcolm or the heirs of Malcolm. And in addition to the by any means necessary philosophy, you know, that obviously includes self-defense. They created programs to bring about that self-sufficiency that Malcolm was always pushing the black community toward.
I agree with that 100%, Brother Curtis. I mean, if you really look at it, like the Panthers, consider themselves, as you said, in the tradition of Malcolm. The Republic of New Africa that Betty Shabazz was a member of 3 years after his assassination, called themselves and defined themselves in those early years as Malcolmites. When you look at even the Kwanzaa and things of that nature, people saw that coming out of the cultural tradition of Malcolm X. Well, Curtis and I both are instructors or professors in African American and Africana Studies programs, and that whole movement that really started in the late '60s came out of people who were part of that Malcolm generation. Same thing that our esteemed attorney just mentioned, that Malcolm talked about the importance of knowing ourselves, and so that Black Studies movement was an attempt by people to implement that type of implement a relevant curriculum that the Panthers often talked about too in our educational institutions that our people were paying their taxes into. So I think, and there's people still doing stuff. I'm a part of an organization, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, that tries to continue work in that legacy. So, sometimes we say that, and I think it can disillusion our youth, and it makes it think that everybody gave up. And that's not true. It's been a continuity of struggle, going back to our enslavement to the first folk who came here. But like Curtis said, sometimes it's not publicized.
That's true.
Sometimes.
And that's key. Go ahead, brother. I didn't mean to cut you off. It's key.
No, sometimes it's not publicized. Sometimes, due to our own contradictions and, what they do to us, sometimes we fall short, but there's still people trying to be in the mix, trying to improve things. Improves a lot situation of our people.
That's true. Go ahead. I want to say this. I like to say when you're talking about publicizing, and I think like Malcolm and Martin, they understood the power of the media to affect the shape and influence ideas and to affect change. That's, let people be aware. It's like a fire engine coming down the street, full alarm, letting people know, hey, I'm coming through the street, let me through. But that's not the solution. But it's helping you publicize the problem. Malcolm was very good at that because the Nation of Islam did not have a paper to speak of before Malcolm formed Muhammad Speaks. They did not have anyway. Then Mike Wallace and Louis Lomax, another unsung hero, when they did the Hate produced back in '59, which broadcast the Nation of Islam to the rest of America, to quote-unquote mainstream America. They helped out as well. I think a lot of people underestimate and people don't understand a lot of our greatest leaders were newspaper men and women like Frederick Douglass, like Ida B. Wells Barnett, like Brother Marcus Garvey. A lot of these folks knew the power of the press. Just like with the Civil Rights Movement, the stuff that we know about the Civil Rights Movement, how you know about the Deacons for Defense, and these other atrocities like the Isaac Woodward blinding in South Carolina or the Emmett Till lynching was because of the black press, not because of New York Times or Washington Post, but because of the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Tri-State Defender, papers like that. They help publicize these things. Go ahead.
I agree, and that's why like this vehicle that you've created is very important, and others like that. I think we have to utilize that today. I think that, and I agree with your first statement that Malcolm and King knew how to utilize that. But I think our oppressors also realize certain things too. And when folks get on the media, they oftentimes paint it in a certain way. I remember as a kid, even Malcolm being, I was 11 years old when he was assassinated, but I can remember him being projected in a certain way by the media at that time. And I think they're even more sophisticated in doing some things like that today. I really think, though, that as you said, we need to create our own media, and we need to do the type of preparation with our young people and with ourselves so we can discern what's going on, too. So one thing that we know to ask questions and to think.
Yeah, go ahead, my brother. What we have to do, really, I listen to, is that we have to understand today's technology.
Very much.
We have to know how to use it effectively. And it's the same way how I actually did this for Rosa Parks. She walked in my office. I didn't ask to be her attorney. She walked in my office in 1990. I had prayed for 3 years to represent her. She did not know me because I knew that I could resurrect her legacy. Now, Ms. Parks was catching a bus in our community. And well, we have to understand, a lot of times we don't know how to take care of our icons and people who have committed who have sacrificed themselves.
No doubt.
The same way how Dr. Betty Shabazz had to struggle in order to make sure she took care of those six babies that she had. So Ms. Parks walked in my office. I represented Dr. Betty Shabazz, in case you didn't know, for 3.5 years as well. She walked in, and I said, I said, God, let me handle this lady, because I know I could resurrect her legacy and do things that other people can do. Because part of my background is entertainment law and intellectual properties that deals with the other part, not about the stage and the bright light, in terms of how you could put together something, package it, market it, and elevate legacies. And I just did the same thing for Nelson Mandela, that put together an exhibit, the first exhibit between America and South Africa in the year of 2008 between this called Dear Mrs. Parks and Dear Mr. Mandela, Trojan Letters, Global Lessons, and you can find it on the internet. So I took her, and then I did 2 books on her, and that it gave us access to the White House and stuff, and it's put us on the road of campaigning, and then I put together 100 gospel artists. So I'm using different techniques in order to create awareness to who she was, and that drew into the attention to a lady named Julia Carson out of Indiana, who actually started to get her the Congressional Medal after I had arranged to get her the President Medal Freedom Award. And now, what I'm saying in all that is just like we have to use the internet and other devices and press materials and angling these events or things that you have where people start to gradually massaging it and taking notice of whatever it is that you're doing. And so we cannot rely on the white media when they control whatever comes out and they shape it the way they want to shape it anyway. Okay. So there's different ways of doing it, and these leaders have created a whole lot of other individuals who they have cloned. Is for us to continue their work for the benefit of our people as well. And so we cannot keep saying that they don't. It's what we, like Malcolm says, you always talking about what they don't do, is what we're going to do. Exactly. So we have to focus on that, on the solution part of things and not on the negative parts of what is happening. So we have enough educated people, but it's getting them back in the fold as well, because we lose a lot of them because of the conditioning process as well that goes on. And that's another thing that said the most educated ones is the ones that he always worried about, because they generally will assimilate and they lose the core of who they are. See, we're the only people that generally don't know who we are. And all the other people that come here, Ethiopian, all the other immigrants, they generally stick together. They understand the depth of who they are. We have to understand that we were created through a cloning process, through a slavery process that has gotten us assimilated, and then the Negro was created that way. After they were brought from Africa through Malcolm, he tells you that too. And then this process was broken down, so our people have been broken down. And so we have to learn how to build ourselves up in order to control our destiny, in order to resurrect our communities. And see, the integration diluted that process so much that we don't even serve our own kind. And so through these types, we're too educated now to be off course of the assimilation process. But we have enough Malcolms, enough Kings, enough Garveys, a number of other individuals of leaders that have come here before, but we just started applying that and teaching the young people, and you all continue to do the work through the school process as well. And that's that's the investment that we have to make in our own selves.
We got a call on the line. That's a great point. And we got Dr. Curtis back in. I always tell people there's a difference between education and indoctrination. indoctrination. A lot of people are indoctrinated into the slave mentality, the slave ideology of comfort, of creature comforts and material wealth, whatever. But education frees you up. It liberates the mind and the spirit. It tells you the sky's the limit. You know, all things are possible. So a lot of people are not educated. They're indoctrinated.
That's true. That's correct.
They're walking zombies. And we got Brother Scotty. Try to get him in. He'll be waiting patiently to get in. Brother Scotty from Black Talk Radio Network. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can. How are you doing tonight, artivist?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine, man. I'm highly blessed, and I'm glad you've been waiting. I know you've been very patient, and I just want to get you in because you got a lot of things to say, a lot of great things to say.
Well, if I may start off with this quote from Malcolm X. The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power because they control the minds of the masses. It was when I saw an interview of Malcolm. He was giving it to one of the major news media organizations, and he was sitting there and he was surrounded by children sitting beside him and behind him. And he talked about during World War II how the American news media during the war made the American public hate the Germans and hate the Japanese, and then immediately after the war was over, they changed it and made the American public love the Japanese and love the Germans, and then hate the Russians and hate the Chinese, who are our former allies. That's the power of the media. When I saw that clip 2 years ago on YouTube, it moved me to start my nonprofit here in North Carolina called the Black Talk Media Project. When you look at Fox News, which is a humongous propaganda machine, which the president of the Fox News channel is Roger Ailes, who was a media consultant going all the way back to the Nixon administration, then you will know exactly what Fox News is, and you will not ever look at it as a news channel. It is a political propaganda channel. As far as controlling the minds of the masses, when I look at the 22 statistics came out that talked about how the transfer of wealth has not been a trickle-down economy, but a trickle-up economy since 2000 under George Bush and the Republicans. When I see that these Tea Party people are out there basically fighting for a political platform and party who has virtually wiped out the middle class, and they're basically out there protesting against their own interests. And so why is that? That is because of the power of Fox News. And then I admire them in a sick sort of way, because when you look at conservative right-wing media, you look at Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, all the ones that's on Fox News, all the individual stations throughout the nation, they are on message. They coordinated. When one starts talking about one story, all of them talk about it, and it goes out to millions of people. We don't have that as black people. We got Radio 1 owned by Kathy Hughes, which is basically playing gospel music or hip-hop music. When they do talk, we got entertainers and comedians, and they're not really talking about any issues. And so I just like to say is that, you know, we need to recognize that as a power, and we need to harness that power. Some people be like, well, there are certain laws that prevent us from being able to buy up all of these media stations, but that's not true. We can create low-power FM stations that serve our community, that broadcast in a 10-mile radius, especially when you're looking at even rural areas like where I live. Black people tend to live in the same places. You get in the urban city. So you can basically shut out or undercut the mainstream media by creating these media centers that's broadcasting low-power FM up to a 10-mile radius that talks about the issues that's going on in those local communities, interviewing politicians and leaders and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is the means is there. Now is the time to use this technology and stop wasting it on all this entertainment, all of this stuff to entertain ourselves, and use it to empower ourselves. But I just had to give that quote that Malcolm X said about the media, as the brother was just talking about the media. And I'm glad that people like your guest tonight, the different guests I've had. I've connected with people who are doing these studies, working with our youth. And while I don't see them on mainstream television, which I hardly watch anymore, they are coming on to our online radio programs and not looking at us like, oh, they just some little old guys with some little online radio shows. They ain't reaching nobody, but, you know, don't sleep on the reach of internet radio. That's all I like to say. Thank you for me this time.
Thank you,
all right.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to have to get on so I can prepare for tomorrow. I got important tasks to do to forward this education here in the city of Atlanta. But I'd also like to invite anybody who's going to be in the Atlanta area on Friday, August the 7th. We do our third annual benefit concert for Dr. Mutulu Shakur. Many of you know was a stepfather of Tupac Shakur, was an activist following in the tradition of Malcolm in New York, organized in Harlem, was a health worker, and also a soldier for his people. And so we in the Malcolm X grassroots movement here in the city of Atlanta are doing his benefit, which will be a Black August concert. The Dead Prayers will be our headlining group for that benefit for Dr. Mutulu Shakur. So that'll be Saturday, December 7th. Not December, I said August 7th. You tell it's a little bit late for me. August 7th. It'll be at the 5 Spot nightclub on Euclid Avenue in the city of Atlanta. Check us on mxgm.org for information, and also on our Facebook page for Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. Thank you, Brother Hurd. I'm going to get on off. And,
all right, brother. Good to hear from you.
You brothers keep on doing the work you're doing. Peace.
Very well. If anyone like to send in information that we post on 365-50.com, we got events that are posted on, just like the one that the caller just got off of. In order to get the word out, we will post it on there for you and highlight and promote whatever your activities are if it's related to Malcolm X legacy.
I definitely got you bookmarked now. I got that website bookmarked. Also, Attorney Gregory, I know a friend of yours. His name is Brother Andrew Wrong Withers. His father, Ernest, spoke very, very highly of you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, you got a great reputation with the people. And Dr. Attn, we thank him a lot because of the work he's been doing. You might know Dr. Attn from the American Gangster series. He actually was involved in talking about Dr. Mutulu Shakur on one of their episodes, and he's due to get out of prison or federal prison in 2016 with the hopes of probably getting out hopefully next year. He's been there for a while, but so many of our freedom fighters have been there. We talk about Mumiam Abdul-Jamal. I also want to ask y'all about this, Dr. Curtis and Brother Reed, about somebody made a point saying that Black Americans are overall worse off than we were in the 60s. The wealth and poor gap has steadily increased. Living wages have not increased at all. There's no living wage per se. But I like to talk about the war because I thought it was interesting when I looked at the news the other day how they gave Congress approved $59 billion for the war, but they talk about some of the people who didn't vote for the money because they wanted to include $20 billion for home issues. It's funny how we don't have money for schools and for health care, but we could find ways to get money for war.
Well, that's a hell of a statement because there's a truism in there. One of the things that we have to find another means of economic development. See, the war is an economic machinery from another thing, but it's war, but there's other businesses that are built off the war, such as the weaponry, the uniforms, a lot of the food rations, a lot of those things. That's an economy, and see, that's been a method that the country has used over the years. When the economy was off, then all of a sudden a war was started. That's a pattern. And so until we learn to internally to develop the country on an economic basis, we wouldn't have to be financing wars. That's really the reality of it all. See, there's the people in the power structure of the upper echelon. They supply weaponry on both sides. That's been a fact.
Yes.
And so then, the powers that be controls the economy, and that is one of the same thing that even Malcolm was even trying to actually have the people to understand, in terms of the economic development of building communities through economics development. You wouldn't have to use these type of vehicles. But see, that comes from the grassroots up. That doesn't come from the top down. See, that's from the people. And so when he started to transform and being inclusive, he started to recognize a lot of these type of things. See, we started looking at it from a black perspective. He's looking at it from a human perspective.
Right.
See, and so that's the reason why since I started to release that program 365-50 and about these chapters, that's why I got, you wouldn't be surprised, a lot of Jewish people, a lot of white people, a lot of other people, they identify with Malcolm's message because they're looking at it from a human rights basis. Because they understand that we have to learn how to develop ourselves inwardly. See, I'm going to show you another thing that he had prophesied on in terms of economic illiteracy. He said, long as you have economic literacy of keeping the people, these are the missing chapters as well. He said, America will always be weak internally. Now, let me show you economic illiteracy. That's how come a lot of people don't understand finance. That's why the banks took advantage of us and exploited us. That's all people. That's not no black or white thing. That's why a lot of people identifying with this message more, because economic literacy, white people have lost homes, black people lose more because of the high unemployment, the job situation. See, all those, the banks of Wall Street, all that tech, that's through economic literacy. That's affected everybody. And so if you educate your people, then the people are able to do for themselves on all levels. That means you can't keep blacks ignorant. You got to educate everybody in the proper way of knowing how to take care of themselves in the proper light. See, this was the other message of the transformation message, that he was being more inclusive of his thinking on the oneness theory, that everybody's coming from one. And then you cannot discriminate on anybody. See, if you're talking about just blacks and then you discriminate on some other body, then you're going to still have some weak infrastructure going on. You got to include us in that process.
Right, and he was certainly right to point that out. But I think one of the things that we sometimes lose sight of as American citizens is the reality in which our country was founded and the direction that the founders intended for it to go. I mean, just because the documents say that all men are created equal and that, you know, there's liberty and justice for all you have to do is read just a little bit of history and know that, you know, none of that was going on when that document was written, nor, you know, did it kick in 100 or 200 years later. So that the people who are voting those billions of dollars to go and rain death and destruction on Afghani people or Iraqi people or whoever these people are we're at war with are in the pockets of, you know, ExxonMobil and Boeing and the other large lobbyists that actually put them in office. I know that when you go vote, you think you're voting for your senator, but you don't give your senator $40 million like Exxon does. So he's going to do more for Exxon than he is going to do for you. And that's where that's coming from. It's a sort of an economic motivation, not necessarily a moral thought process involved in that.
Thank you.
And I think it goes along with your comment, Mr. Reed, about not being smart about the economy and how our personal and public finances fit into the larger economy. And I agree that we need to educate ourselves on that level.
I also like to point out, too, that with the news organizations, like you talk about the lobbyists and the war machine, that the media, the corporate media, I won't call them mainstream, because I think what we're talking about is really mainstream. But the corporate media is owned by the folks who got contracts with the Pentagon, the Westinghouses, and, you know, look at CBS and Viacom. All them places, look at Westinghouse and General Electric. They got big, giant contracts with the Pentagon to make these weapons and to cause these distractions. It's like, for example, when Harry Truman met with Paul Robeson back in the 40s, because people don't understand the severe backlash of the lynchings and whatnot that took place after World War II, although 1 million black folks served in the armed services and fought and died for this country to make the world safe for democracy. The backlash that took place, and Harry Truman telling Paul Robeson, look, Paul, you know, Britain's on our side. He said, no, the empire is the problem why the world the way it is. It's this empire thinking. They got the way, it got us by the neck. And I think with Malcolm, like you said, with Malcolm, he understood that you just couldn't depend on the black folks inside America. You had to make this an international struggle. You had to connect, just like with Che Guevara going to Angola and telling people we got to create mini Vietnams everywhere. Because Vietnam, we didn't win that war because we didn't have the will. And we don't understand how rice farmers could fight to the death. Anytime you believe something that's greater than yourself and you willing to put yourself on the line for it, then you're a powerful person. You're a force of nature. Like Dr. King said, if a man ain't willing to die for anything, he ain't fit to live. Mr. Nonviolent Dr. King said that. He said, I'd rather die at 36 than die. He said, I'd rather die at 36 than to die a spiritual death. And, you know, be 80 and have a spiritual death. I mean, there's a lot of people that are living, just taking up space. And even Fred Hampton, if you look at all politics, our local, he formed the Rainbow Coalition. I got somebody, PSS Radio, who was a member of the Young Lords. And Fred Hampton formed the Rainbow Coalition that Reverend Jesse kind of took and made it to his own thing. But he understood the power of collectivism, of identifying with the proletariat and the working class. You talk about Black August. We talk about George Jackson, Soledad brother. I mean, his death connected with the Attica Uprising and the prison reforms. I mean, all this stuff is interrelated and stuff like that, but we're not teaching this in the schools. And one thing I like to say about Brother Malcolm, the only reason why we still talk about Brother Malcolm and people got to understand it is because of the hip-hop culture. Hip-hop culture made James Brown relevant. They kept him relevant because they sampled most of his music during the foundation of the hip-hop culture movement. But also you got to think about it was Public Enemy and KRS-One and all these other rap legends and whatnot in the 80s and the 70s that were sampling Malcolm X speeches and kept him alive. Because there was a lot of folks in middle-class Black America did not want Malcolm legend to live. That's why, Oz Davis said he was our shining Black Prince. That was a hell of a statement to make. So a lot of Black folks were there. So my grandfather, that's true. A lot of Black folks were happy, not just white people.
That's true. They were afraid to deal with the self-examination of ourselves because he was speaking so much truism.
Right.
That's the reality. And now that's one reason why his words are still ringing, because it's based on truth.
Well, speaking of his words, I have a quick question for you, Brother Reed.
Yes, sir.
And this might come up on the website, and if so, you can just tell me. I'll go check it out. But what format will you release these new writings, and do you have a release date?
The irony of it all, the staging of this call at this time, is that I was just in New York yesterday, less than 24 hours, meeting with. I tell you who it is. Grove Press Atlantic. And you say, well, who are they? Malcolm and Alex Haley had signed an agreement with Doubleday. And Doubleday was going to release the book. This all ties into your comment. And they got scared of the book, and they canceled that contract that Alex Haley had 3 weeks after Malcolm was assassinated. They thought the book was going to be great. They got scared of it. And so that's one reason why this call is in D.C., because I was at the Copyright Office today. I took a train from New York. And to tighten up some other parts, the book has been already complete. Grove Press came along, and Alex was out there struggling trying to get this material together, and this was his first book. And Grove Press stepped in, and they published the book. That's why you have the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then Grove Press also gave Alex some extra money in order to give to Dr. Betty Shabazz. They took a gamble. They are independent. They're not of the major corporate world. They're independent. They're one of the largest independent book publishers. And when you research them, you find out that they publish other books like this. They're a major company. And so I was there in order to see about getting this material out. And so we're looking at within a 5 to 6 month span of time or less of getting this material out, because so many people actually need his words in terms of some guidance to understand our journey and where we've been and understanding where we are, because his words are so relevant to what's happening with the economy
right.
and the state of this country now. That's why so many people are actually identifying with his words now, because the conditions of the 60s are really more like the conditions of what's happening now in the economy among our people. And so we're looking at that. So that's why it's very important in terms of, see, that was my commitment when I had made that type of investment in order to preserve the words, because I was afraid that someone would get it and distort it and misappropriate it, and then they could have rearranged history. That was right, and that was my vision that I was just looking at it, and I was scared. That's why I did it. So we're looking at it within a 6 month span, the time to answer your question.
Okay, and you said there were going to be 4 chapters.
There'll be chapters. If volume 1 is done, it's on the Negro. And then there'll be another one within the next 12 months. And then the other one, then there's going to be one on the economic plan as well.
Okay.
Let me help you gentlemen with the economic plan, the Malcolm vision, and then you understand it. The reason why a lot of people that runs office, black and white, it ain't no just blacks, black and white, can't get the answer right or can't get it right. And not that Malcolm he had that vision, but the model of the economic plan has been done before. And I give you the insight of it. Then you say, yeah, that's reality. But see, when you build a community in terms of circulate your dollars, see, most time what most people see when they see the inner cities and these cities in the rural areas go down, they think about housing. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody think about housing.
Right.
But see, housing is just one part of it. You have to build a community, and Malcolm understood this more in terms of he took Elijah Muhammad's model and he expanded the model in terms of how to achieve real integration. This is in its own handwritten notes. This is going to be on display too. Mm-hmm. You got to have, to build a community, you got to look at even cultural activity. This is Malcolm's thing. See, no one ever think about even putting a museum in the community. He said you got to have education, you got to have hospitals, you got to have even finance institutions, you got to have social service agencies. He's got a 14-point plan in terms of it. Then you're talking about how the Jews and all these other people, when they used to build communities, the Jews would sell us their homes in certain areas, and we move in. But they had built a community, and when it came to a certain point, they would sell it to us. But they had put in a whole infrastructure. And so a lot of these people that run for office don't look at things in a holistic, comprehensive manner. They say, we're going to get housing, or we're going to prove this part. So that's a patch approach to something. It's a piecemeal approach. And so until you start looking at it on a comprehensive basis, you will never heal the community in a proper way.
Well, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about that, and that kind of goes back to the organization that I study, the Black Panther Party, and you sort of made me think about some of the effort that they put forth in the community in terms of building what you were describing. I mean, in addition to their free breakfast programs and free health clinics, which you pointed out you needed, like social services, they were also building up and investing in businesses, creating people and nurturing people who would become the politicians and the doctors. They had their own, what they call liberation schools, built on the Freedom School model out of Mississippi. But they were doing all these things you were talking about, and I can't help but wonder if there were people who left Malcolm's AAU and got, either with the Panthers or somehow influenced them to, sort of create this network and infrastructure that you're describing here.
Yes, I hear you saying, which is a very good point. But those are the type of the awareness level that we have to have in order to save our community, as opposed to keep pointing fingers at things. In terms of that, we need to look at things on a comprehensive basis and start implementation.
Right.
What's going on? See,
he was working on the action plan and not the analysis plan.
Yeah.
He did talk about and try to implement next steps. So I wonder, I've got another question for you, if we're going to learn anything more about the OAAU and these new papers that you're making available.
I'm sorry, come again. What you said? Are we going to learn anything new?
Right. Is there going to be anything that Malcolm talks about in the Organization of African American Unity?
You will see how things should be looked upon on a more international basis of connecting what Malcolm was talking about on a comprehensive basis. Right now, I'm going to show you how far thinking he is. See, today, we still thinking locally, a lot of us. Mm-hmm. When people are taking jobs through the internet on a global basis. There are people even, they don't have to be here now. See, a lot of these calls, they're just like collection calls. The company's hiring people in India and other people making these calls. And you be thinking it's local.
Right.
See, we have to start thinking, we have to prepare ourselves in order to develop ourselves professionally, business-wise, and thinking how to think globally in order to keep the jobs here. And he was already thinking that way on a global basis, that we all have to have a certain level of development in order to compete that way. So we got to start thinking locally. When the people are taking jobs, and you still think it's the neighbor or the other people or the immigrants or all this, but this stuff is going on a global basis now.
Right.
And so we have to become more in tune and aware of thinking on the international basis like he was doing.
I know Huey Newton said that if Malcolm didn't get killed, they would have joined him. There would have been no Black Panther Party. I mean, everybody would have joined Malcolm because of like what you just stated. You're trying to make this organization and make it work on both local and international level.
There you go. That's what I'm saying.
I think with Marcus Garvey, the problem with Marcus Garvey, I know I read The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual by Harold Cruz. The problem with Marcus Garvey is that he had the numbers, he just didn't have the economic plan. I mean, he had the people following him.
But he was thinking on the basis of this trading. I can't speak on that level, and I don't like to speak on things that I don't, but I just know that he was under international trading, but he didn't have a comprehensive economic plan. I would say that as well.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even with, you could look at the people, you could trace everybody and say, well, Booker T. Washington had a great idea because he was Marcus Garvey's hero. That's who Marcus Garvey was corresponding with from Jamaica was Booker T. Washington. That's the reason why he came to America, to meet up with Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington died in 1915. And then, Marcus formed the UNIA in 1916. and went from there. But you look at like black nationalism and stuff like that. You look at the things that have been done, like with Booker T. Washington, the National Business League, or you look at the different, like you look at people don't even mention what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898. You know, the state of North Carolina did an exhaustive study about the Wilmington race riots of 1898. Well, really, they let you know that Jim Crow was in effect because they took control of our economics. A lot of black businesses and black, you know, people that represent the interests of the political office were undermined. So that represents Jim Crow more so than Plessy v. Ferguson, because when you control a person's economics, you can't control their vote. I mean, if you don't have no economics, you don't have a vote.
Well, you really got them enslaved.
Yeah.
And you got and you have them in a position in terms of exploitation, anything that you so desire.
Yeah.
And that's how powerful that is. And he understood that.
Well,
go ahead, brother.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Well, no. I was going to have to sign off, but I was going to comment on that last point you made. The brother opened up with the quote from Malcolm, and I really liked that and appreciated that. And I can think of a quote, you know, of one that I'd like to just kind of leave on, and it actually goes with what we're talking about here, especially some of the comments you were just making. You know, like when you find yourself in that position, the position you just described, where your economy is controlled, and all of these other things kind of create what Brother Reed just described as slavery. You know, you have to start thinking about freedom at that point, unless you like being a slave. And Malcolm just so happened not to like it and was trying to get other people to see the value in not liking it. And so he started talking about the value on freedom. And that's what I'm going to sign off with, because I've got to get rolling. But Malcolm said that when a person places the proper value on freedom, there's nothing under the sun that he will not do to acquire that freedom. Whenever you hear a man saying he wants freedom, but in the next breath, he's going to tell you what he won't do to get it, or what he doesn't believe in doing in order to get it, he doesn't believe in freedom. A man who believes in freedom will do anything under the sun to acquire it or preserve his freedom. And I think that kind of solidifies some of the comments y'all are making. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me to come on your show. This is my most favorite person in the world, you know, and I appreciate you allowing me to say a word or two, put my 2 cents in about it. I hope I can come on again sometime. And I enjoyed meeting you, and I can't wait until the book comes out, Brother Reed. I'm looking forward to it. Maybe we can stay in touch.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But what I'm going to do, when I'm going to sign off, I'm going to quote from the Unpublished chapters for you all.
Okay.
All right.
As part of the reading that I did on his birthday. And so you would say, well, at least I heard from the Unpublished chapters.
That'd be an honor. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. One of the things that Malcolm said in the Unpublished chapters, what he wanted his life to stand for. First of all, he said, I'm writing this book for the best interests of the Negro and the white man in America. I wasted 7 years of my life in the streets of America. Today, after spending the transitional years of my life in Boston and later Harlem as a human predator, parasite, and leech, for all of which I was inevitably apprenticing for self-destruction in Boston, and afterwards spending the next 7 years in prison, white America vilified and scorned me today in the news media's headlines over radio and television as the infamous black Muslim minister, Malcolm X, accused of teaching and spreading the untruth, hatred of the white man among my black brothers. No man has but so much time to do his life work and find his purpose for living. Everything that I do now takes on a sense of urgency. Today I have not the time to write a book merely with the ambition to excite or stimulate some reader's mind. I have, the readers will see, in years, chapters to come, who has lived as closely as it is possible for a Negro to live in the white man and live with the white man and the white woman. In fact, I consider my life to be a perfect mirror that reflects the attitude of the white man in America towards the black man. In part, in fact, it was what I learned of the white man that personally helped me to shape my thoughts, convictions, and positive core values of self-esteem, self-help, self-determination, and self-reliance that totally changed my life to the perspective about him that I have. Only a part of it is the white man in America seen especially seems to be, to me, in an indeed a peculiar and ironic position to accuse of any black man of hatred. I tell the black man the truth of a race that enslaved our race to help build America. His rich country, a man who has raped our black foreparents, mothers, until as a race today we are no longer even black. A white man who in every one of his wars took us to bleed and die with him, and yet for all this has rewarded us with the back of his hand and his table scraps for 100 years since the Civil War. Now, I give my life to be used to benefit America and humanity, that America will learn that the Negro problem is a challenge to America's consciousness, and that the Negro is America's problem. As long as America ignores the Negro, America will always be trouble and never be at peace. If my life story helped free the Negro mind to do for himself, his family, and his community, it would help America. Then the story of my life would have helped both races in the best interest of humanity to move beyond where we have been, where we are, and be of some use to transform America and the world to make it a better place for us all. Malcolm X, my interim introduction chapter of my autobiography.
Oh, that was beautiful, man. I really appreciate that. That was awesome.
Right, yeah, I appreciate that. That was nice.
So those were excerpts of the introduction that I want to share with you all. And so you gentlemen have a good night, and God bless you all.
Oh, Devin, bless you both, Brother Reed and Dr. Curtis. It's an honor to have you all on. In the words of great Duke Ellington, we love you all madly, and please come again. Take care.
All right, we will. Thanks a lot, brother.
Sure.
No problem.
Peace, man. Good night.
Peace.